So in this study, we looked at the generation effect, which refers to this finding that material that is self-generated is remembered better than material that is passively read. And in 2004, Dewey Stanley and Bjork employed a two-block mixed list paradigm where they had participants study read and generated words in the same list. And then after a delay, participants took a cued recall test. Then participants repeated the same procedure for block 2 with different words. And what they found is a generation effect in block 1, replicating all previous research. So generated words were recalled better than read words in block 1. Critically, what they found is that it is eliminated on block 2, so there's no difference between the word types. So we're interested in whether participants have a metacognitive understanding of this effect. So in experiment 1, we used the same procedure as Dewey Stanley and Bjork with Q target pairs. And we just wanted to replicate previous research. So participants studied each pair for 5 seconds. Then in experiment 2, we wanted to see whether the time participants spend on studying each word type tracks their recall. So we had participants, we gave participants unlimited study time. In experiment 3, we were looking at judgments of learning. So in the immediate condition, after studying each Q target pair, participants were given the Q back and asked to provide the likelihood that they would recall the target on the upcoming test. Then in the delayed condition, participants completed the entire study block and then were shown each cue and asked the same question. So participants in the delayed condition would have to retrieve the target to provide the judgment. Then in experiment 4, we did the same procedure with, but this time, instead of providing judgments of learning, participants were asked if they would like to restudy the word pair. And again, we had immediate and delayed conditions. For experiment 1, we did replicate previous research. The figure I showed before is actually from our findings for experiment 1. Then in experiment 2, looking at study times, we hypothesized that because generated words seem more difficult to process to participants, they would spend more time studying them than read words in the first block, and then not significantly so in the second block. That's exactly what we found. In the first block, participants studied generated words for longer than read words, but in the second block, there was no difference between the word types. Then in experiment 3, for judgments of learning, we hypothesized that in the delayed condition, because when participants would have to retrieve each target, they would realize that generated words are easier to retrieve than read words and would judge them as better learned. But in the immediate condition, they wouldn't have to retrieve it, so there would be no differences in judgments of learning. That's exactly what we found. In the delayed condition in block 1, participants gave higher judgments of learning to generated words than read words, and then not differently so in block 2. And then in the immediate condition, judgments of learning did not differ as a function of word type or block. In experiment 4, looking at restudy decisions, we hypothesized that participants in the delayed condition would choose to restudy the more difficult to retrieve read words more frequently than generated words, but there wouldn't be such differences in the immediate condition. And what we found is that in the delayed condition, participants did choose to restudy read words more frequently than generated words, but not significantly so. Surprisingly, in the immediate condition, we found the opposite trend where participants chose to restudy generated words more frequently than read words. It's not entirely clear why this is happening, but if you look at study times, perhaps that these longer study times for generated words reflect more effortful processing that participants are then using as a cue that they need to restudy those words. So in conclusion, participants do seem to have some metacognitive understanding of their recall as evidenced by study times and delayed judgments of learning. And we are planning on running follow-up studies in which we let participants actually restudy the words, which is not something we did in our experiment 4, and that might have affected our results. We also want to explore whether there are any design effects in our experiments 3 and 4 in our future studies. But overall, this line of research is important because it allows us to see whether people consciously switch their processing to improve their memory, which can aid in structuring educational materials in classes. And that's all I have. Thank you.